Good morning, you guys. How is everybody? I'm waiting for everybody to come on. We'll take a couple of minutes. I'll see who's here. I see Daniela. I see Carla, Coral, Lois, David. Carla, Coral, Daniela. Hopefully you guys are okay this morning. I'd love to hear your voices for a second if you want to say hello while we wait to see if anybody else is going to join us. I got you, Lois.
Good morning, Miss.
We're going to be doing the review of hip, leg, and thigh today for your test. Good morning, David. We're going to wait a couple more minutes to get started. We're going to go over the diagrams and through the highlights again a second time. Hi, Adriana. And then after we go through the diagrams, we'll review the highlights again, and I'll let you know some of the super special important highlights that you need to know. And we'll also ask any questions you may have, but it's just kind of a review today of what you guys have learned between Dave and I. Hopefully you've been studying, right, for the last several days. Everything will be due by Sunday, but turn in a little bit at a time if you can of the workbook. The test diagrams are a separate activity, due separately. I know that they are in your workbook. It's a way for you guys to review. And that's been in there, as well as the bodybuilder project, some Kahoots, all that good stuff. So we'll get started with the review in just a minute. And I have discovered that trying to put the diagrams on the board behind me doesn't work so great. I may write on the board behind me just to help you guys remember some of these mnemonics to remember muscles. But I think that you may not be able to see it, so you can always ask me a question if you need me to go over it again. I'm going to screen share the diagrams versus trying to write them on the board behind me. That didn't work very well. So if you have those diagrams printed out or you need a piece of paper to write on, when I go into screen share, it's hard for me to see if there's any chat. So if you do have a question while I'm in the middle of sharing the diagrams on the screen, you might have to unmute and let me know because it doesn't show me if somebody's typed into the chat. But let's get started. I miss you guys. So let's share the screen of this right here. Hopefully you guys can see what I have up there. I like to be able to see both. Let me see if it'll let me do both. There we go. Nope. Yeah, I want both. All right, guys. I am going to go ahead and start going over these diagrams for you right now. If you have them out and you haven't filled them in or you want to double check them, we're looking first at the hip. And number one is hip. Pretty easy, right? Number two is ilium. Make sure you notice it's IUM. On this particular test, because it's online in MindTap and there's a drop-down menu, it's not going to be misspelled, but I have seen in like MBLEX and Massage Prep before that they'll throw an EUM. Ilium with an E is a totally different part in our body. And then number three, pubis, and number four, ischium. Number 5, we have our lumbar vertebra. They're pointing to one vertebra. If vertebra, vertebrae is okay, vertebrae plural. 6, the sacroiliac joint. 7, sacrum. 8, the sacrococcygeal joint. Remember, when it's in between two joints, we add an I, an A, or an O. So between the sacrum and the coccyx is the sacrococcygeal joint. Number 9, coccyx. 10, coxal joint. And 11 is the femur. Scrolling on down. 12, 5th lumbar vertebrae. Oh, by the way, to interrupt myself talking, on this test, not every single blank is answered. So as you can see, the ones that are circled, and on this one, all of them are circled, are the ones that will need to be answered. And the ones that have X's will not need to be answered. So the diagrams I scanned in for your test will actually have the X's and the circles so that you can know. Pay very close attention to the numbers in the test because they will skip to match the numbers that are circled. So you may miss a number or something like that. So just make sure you pay attention to the numbering during the test. So we scrolled on down. 5th lumbar vertebra is number 12. Number 13, PSIS. On the test, it will say posterior superior iliac spine, spelled out. Number 14, medial sacral crest. 15, your greater trochanter. 16, lesser trochanter. Remember, lesser is always on the medial side closest in, and the greater trochanter is that big bony landmark on the outside. Since like day 1 of massage, we told you when you're sweeping up the leg to be careful you don't go over that greater trochanter. It can be quite painful. 17 is your gluteal tuberosity. 18 is your ischial tuberosity. And if you've ever done yoga, what we often call our sits bones that we sit when we say, move the fleshy part of your body, bottom out of the way to sit up on your sits bones to sit upright. We are talking about the ischial tuberosity, IT, sit bone. And then 19, obturator foramen. Obturator, I don't know if Dave showed you guys, I'm gonna stop share for a second. If Dave ever showed you guys the trick to knowing the left and right hip bone, did he ever show you guys that? So when you have a hip bone, it'll fit comfortably in your hand on the right side or comfortably in your hand on the left side with the obturator down here. So he always says it'll fit your face just like a telephone, and you can look into the obturator foramen and say, hello, obturator. So good way to know your left and right bone, one from the other, to remember your obturator foramen, that you're asking for the obturator on your hip bone. If it helps you remember them a little bit more easily, it's a good thing. All right, so let me go back to my screen share. All right, so moving on then past obturator foramen, now you can see what I was talking about, that big opening, the foramen there. We're scrolling down to the next page. And number 1, iliac crest. Number 2 are iliac fossa, and we know a fossa is a smooth, kind of curved in space in a bone, typically named after the muscle that lies there, but not always. We have our ASIS, which is our anterior superior iliac spine. Then number 4, our AIIS, which is our anterior inferior iliac spine. So just remember, inferior below, superior above, right? Number 5 is our pectineal line. 6, the superior ramus of the pubis. It's right around that obturator, right? Because we're down near the pubic symphysis, where that symphygeal surface is where the 2 hip bones come together, where that little cartilage place is the symphysis of the pubis. That allows a little bit of movement between the hip bones and stuff, especially a little bit of spreading during childbirth, etc. So we have the pubic tubercle above that symphyseal surface. Then we have the symphyseal surface, and we have the inferior ramus of the pubis. So just remember the ramus, superior and inferior, is right around that symphyseal surface. It's kind of that flat space where that pubic symphysis is, where those bones come together. Remember, it's like a facet that meets another bone. 10 PSIS, posterior superior iliac spine. 11 PIIS, posterior inferior iliac spine. 12, your greater sciatic notch. 13, the ischial spine. Remember, the ischial spine's coming down towards that ischial tuberosity. We have the lesser sciatic notch. Number 15 is being skipped, although it never hurts to learn it. That's the obturator we talked about before. And 16 is your ischial tuberosity, or those sits bones, and then the ramus of the ischium. So just remember the ischial side, ischial tuberosity, ischial spine, ramus of ischium, all on that one side, and the symphyseal, the ramus of the pubis, is on that inside area where the symphyseal surface is. Going on down to the bottom, and you can see here we only have 18, 19, 21, 29, and 32. The reason we've done this is we didn't want you to have to remember PSIS, ASIS, etc., like 20 different times on these diagrams. So the numbers will go on the test: 18, 19, 21, 29, 32. When I created the test, I tried to make sure they were bold with an asterisk, so you'd notice it was skipping numbers when you're looking at your diagram, but the diagrams do have the circles and the X's so it doesn't throw you off. So 18 is that anterior gluteal line, and then you have the posterior gluteal line. So anterior, it's almost kind of more like a superficial, right? But anterior means it's more front. Then the posterior is kind of back behind it, right? Posterior behind. Inferior gluteal line down below, number 21. We're skipping over to 29, that iliac tubercle. Tubercle, a little bump, right? It's kind of hard to tell in this diagram. And then 32 is the acetabulum, which is kind of up above that obturator foramen. And I am moving on. Unmute if you need me to stop it all. Next diagram, we're coming to the femur. Locating what we have on the femur here. Number 1, our greater trochanter. Remember, that's that outside lateral side of the hip. The head of the femur, which goes into that ball and socket. We have the fovea of the head. Then we have the lesser trochanter, more medial, right? And we have the intertrochanteric line, which just means we have some attachments happening there, right? We have the shaft of the femur. We have the adductor tubercle, so that gives you an idea of what's going to attach there, right? Some adductor muscles. Medial epicondyle, so if you remember your lesser trochanter is on the medial side, that greater trochanter is more lateral, it's on the outside of your hips that you can feel, then you won't mix up your medial and lateral epicondyles and condyles, right? So adductor tubercle, medial epicondyle, and then your medial condyle, the epi above, right, or upon, so it's the bump above the bump, is what I always tell people, how to remember epi and condyle. It's always above, epi above or upon, it's the bump above the bump. And over on the other side, I kind of went out of order as I was scanning down. We have the patellar surface where our patella, A goes, our lateral epicondyle, the bump above the bump, and the lateral condyle. Stop me if you have questions. I'm going to keep plugging right on. Coming down to the posterior view. So remember, in anatomic position, you just got to flip the whole body around. So Obviously the head we're skipping, we didn't need to label it again. If we have a head, we have to have a neck, so we're labeling the neck. Number 15, the intertrochanteric crest. And I want you to notice that on the posterior view, intertrochanteric crest, scrolling up. On the anterior view, number 9, intertrochanteric line. So remember, anterior line, posterior is the crest. Number 18, the pectineal line. 19, the medial lip of linea aspera. Then lateral, so it's going to be on the opposite side, right? Because the side that has the head of the femur is the medial side. So the medial linea aspera is going to be on the closest side to the head of the femur. The lateral lip is on the lateral side. Makes sense. And then skipping over to 25, the trochanteric fossa. Below that, we have a gluteal tuberosity. Tuberosity bigger than a tubercle, has a little bit more texture to it, usually a little bit more rough than a small tubercle. I always remember it because it's a tuber city. That's what one of my students called it. A city is bigger than a tubercle. And then we have our intercondylar fossa, right down between the condyles there in the posterior view. Going on to muscles of the pelvis and thigh. And when we get back face to face where we're going through the book, I will give you some good mnemonics to help you remember muscle groups like adductors, the deep six. Some of those you might have already heard from Dave, but it never hurts to hear them again. So number 1, we have psoas major. Remember, the major is always over the minor. Then we have psoas minor. We have the iliacus. And coming around, you can see the inguinal ligament. So that gives you a good idea. We know where our inguinal line is, and our inguinal nodes are. So when you look at that, you can kind of see where those muscles lie in ratio to flesh and bone. Tensor fascia lata, I call it the latte, TFL, because it's right up there on the outside edge of the hip. And if I drink too many lattes, they go to my hip. So the TFL. Sartorius, longest muscle in the body that crosses 2 joints. And we'll go over that in the highlights again also. That's an important thing to note. And then number 7, IT tract. Some people call it the IT band. Rectus femoris. I don't want to go too far down because I want to be able to do 11, 12, and 13. Then we have vastus lateralis on the lateral side, vastus medialis, more medial part of the thigh, right? Pectineus. Then we have adductor longus and gracilis. Moving on to muscles of the pelvis and thigh 2, just that side view now. We can see our glute medius. Again, that TFL, that latte that puts fat on my hips. So we have our TFL there, tensor fascia latae. We have our glute maximus, the largest thickest muscle in the body, and we'll go over that as a highlight as well. And then we have our IT tract. Scrolling on down, you can see where gracilis and adductor magnus are. So even though this is a posterior view of right hip, it's kind of a side view a little bit too, but most posterior, because you can see where the glutes kind of come around. Actually, it's a true posterior view. Sorry, it kind of looked turned. That's my bad. So gracilis and adductor magnus on the most medial side, because they're adductors, right? And adductors bring back towards middle line, abduct away. Semitendinosus, and semimembranosus. And then we have our, I already did glute max, IT tract, our biceps femoris long head and our biceps femoris short head. And say grace before T is an easy way to remember those muscles: sartorius, gracilis, and semitendinosus, that all attach to that pes and serenus, which we will go over during our highlights as well for those mnemonics. Moving on, I'm just going to check in before I go any further forward to make sure there are no chat questions anywhere. Looks like we're all good so far. I can continue on. All right. I know reviewing can be a little bit sometimes. So now we're moving to the muscles of the pelvis and thigh 5. So number 2, you will see glute medius. And this kind of shows you the layers of how they all go superficial to deep. Obviously, we've got that glute maximus kind of pulled out of the way for us there. You can see that deep piriformis running out towards the trochanter there, right? And that's very deep, so you can see the directions that the fibers go. I don't know if you've ever been told, if you're trying to do any deep work on the piriformis with the elbow or the fist, just going straight in to release the piriformis, you're only compressing right into the belly of the muscle. So when you're trying to release down into those glutes, you kind of want to come down in and then angle in order to release them. Just pumping straight down into the muscle doesn't really do a lot. So you want to come in at an angle when you're trying to release the deep 6 or any of those muscles deep into the glute area, rather than just coming straight in. That's just a good little side note to remember when you're trying to release some tightness in there, especially piriformis. I kind of tend to come in and drag my elbow at an angle coming out towards trochanter to try to release it. Below piriformis, you see the sciatic nerve. That's why, even though it's very deep, the piriformis lays right on top of it. We want to try to release that. All the other deep 6 are deep to the sciatic nerve, but the piriformis is superficial to the sciatic nerve, even though it's part of that deep 6. We want to try to release that. If anybody's getting that sciatic nerve pain, that numbness or tingling down the outside of their leg, a lot of time with some good hip stretches and deep work into piriformis, we can help release that for them. Number 5, quadratus femoris. Then we have glute max, what little bit we're showing there, and that cutaway, you can see the big section cutaway there. Then we have the sacrotuberous ligament, and then adductor magnus running in there medially to the thigh. On the other side, we can see that glute, the minimus glute there, and gemellus superior, and then gemellus inferior. Then going further down to that lateral view of the hip, we can see psoas major coming up off that iliac crest. We can see the piriformis again, how it comes around to that lesser trochanter. Gemellus superior, obturator inferior, and then the gemellus inferior. Moving on to bones of knee, leg, and foot. We have, of course, the femur coming down. And then we have the patella and the tibia. Remember, the tibia is the big one that articulates with the femur. I always say the fibula is its shorty, just like the radius is the shorty to the ulna. We have the tarsals and metatarsals, and we didn't label the phalanges because we only need to label them like once. So moving on down to the view of your tibia and fibula, we have the medial and lateral intracondylar tubercles. Medial and lateral intracondylar tubercles. We have the lateral condyle. So I always remember, I mentioned this on Tuesday, but I'll remind you again, if you get your lateral and medial side mixed up, our big toe is on our medial side, right? And I remember big toe, tibia. Tibia is on my big toe side, and the fibula is out there on the pinky side. So that means if we're talking about the fibula, we are looking out at this view at the lateral condyle, and then you can see the head of the fibula coming in underneath the femur there where it articulates with it. And then we have the lateral malleolus. So again, if you remember, the fibula is on the pinky toe side and the tibia is on the big toe side, the lateral malleolus will be on your fibula. And then number 13, we have the medial condyle, and we are looking at the tibia there. And then we have the tibial tuberosity. We have the soleal line, looking at the posterior view. And I think of the soul. Soul means sun, sun and moon. And I think my moon is on my butt and the soleal line's on the posterior side. But again, whatever helps you remember which side the soleal line is on. We have the medial malleolus. And then we have the fossa of the lateral malleolus. Moving on. Not far to go here, you guys. Then we'll be able to get into the highlights and all that good stuff. All right, so we have calcaneus, talus, cuboid, navicular, cuneiforms, metatarsals, and phalanges. And I'll also write on the board our way to remember those bones of the foot. I mentioned it to you guys the other day, the never totally consumed curdled milk. I've also done the cute, cuddly tigers need milk. So there's different ways to remember that one. So coming down lower, we're not going to relabel all the metatarsals. You only have to label the sesamoid bone there. Number 9. Coming into muscles of legs and foot, I think we're still good. I haven't heard anybody ask me to stop. Peroneus longus that we can see there. And then tibialis anterior, we're looking at a lateral view, right? So we're looking at the outside view of the leg. That's why we can see the tibialis anterior. And we can see part of that gastroc as well, gastrocnemius, in that lateral view. And then coming down to the anterior view, tibialis anterior, gives you that good view. You can kind of see right where it lies in with the tibia. Really important muscle to massage. Hopefully you're not skipping it. I know some massage therapists tend to skip the front of the lower leg. And if you have anybody who walks, runs, or in any way moves their ankles around, they're gonna need their tibialis massaged. Kind of see that soleus coming out from behind. The gastroc as well, we just don't have that one labeled. The peroneus brevis, and then you have your extensor digitorum longus, and those are the ones, remember, the digits of the foot. And then hallucis is the big toe, the one that's coming down to the big toe. All right, I think that's all of those. I'm gonna stop screen sharing. And does anybody have any questions about those diagrams and how the the test. We'll skip around on that. I think that's pretty clear, right? We're good there? Thumbs up. I don't see any faces, but I'm assuming thumbs up. All right. So we're going to move on now back into our highlights. We're going to review those again, kind of go through, and also work on some of those mnemonics I've talked about. We're not going to do the full lecture of the muscles because that already happened between Dave and I, but kind of more just touch on the highlights. So let's turn to page. Bear with me a second. Lots of pages without any highlights. All right, I want us to jump over to page 296. And that's just the view that we have that's on your diagram that you're studying. And a way to remember your glutes when you're looking in this view, and actually they're not even labeled on here. I'll wait till we get to the glute page to label those for you, I think. But basically, maximus is more lateral, medius and minimus more medial. That's a way to remember those. And I'm also going to wait for the deep six. All right, so we're not going to have any highlights there, you guys. We're going to jump forward. All right, let's jump to page 302. You guys know that the muscles put into groups as far as movement go is my favorite section of each part of the body in here because it gives you everything into a nice, neat group. I wish that we were live because if you've been in my class before, I'd have you guys doing flexion, extension, eversion. We'd play some Simon Says, doing the movements, etc. But what I want you guys to make note of is flexion of the hip joint. That you need to know at least the first 2 or 3 muscles that are flexion, but specifically that psoas major is responsible for flexion of the hip joint. So if you don't have psoas major for flexion highlighted, make sure that you highlight that. And then under extension, I want you to remember that entire group. You may get a test question that says, all of these muscles perform extension of the hip except. So if you know that glute maximus, biceps femoris, long head, semitendinosus, membranosus, adductor magnus, and gluteus medius are the extensors, you'll be able to pick out the one that is not the extensor of the hip. Jumping over to page 304, looking at abduction, abduction, we know that's away, right? I want you to know those muscles that are responsible for abduction of the hip. Gluteus maximus, all fibers. Medius, all fibers. Minimus, TFL, sartorius, and piriformis, when the hip is flexed. Underline when the hip is flexed. If the hip is not flexed, piriformis can't do the abduction because of the way the ball and socket of the hip works. But if it's flexed, it's going to help. So you can even just stand there and try to flex your hip and then do that rotation out. And you'll be able to feel piriformis if you do that. Bend your knee up in front of you and then rotate out and you'll feel piriformis in there. And I really feel it because I need some elbow in my piriformis big time. I can't wait till massage places are able to open again, you guys. I am in some bad shape. I don't know how about you guys. Are you guys missing your massages? Feel free to type yes if you're missing your massages. All right, so we're jumping over to page 306. And again, some of this is repetition from either Dave or myself. The 4 large quadricep muscles primarily extend the knee. The cylindrical superficial rectus femoris is located on the anterior thigh, and it is the only quadricep that crosses two joints. I would underline only quadricep that crosses two joints, the hip and the knee. All four quadricep muscles converge into a single tendon above the knee. The tendon connects to the top and sides of the patella before attaching via the patellar ligament to the tibial tuberosity. Sorry guys, I got a little itch on my nose. So, under actions, extend the knee, rectus femoris itself, flex the hip, and I want you to make sure you have that one underlined, that rectus femoris flexes the hip. It's a super special highlight. Its insertion, tibial tuberosity via the patella and patellar ligament. Super special highlight again. Make sure you guys highlight that one, underline it, asterisk it, whatever you need. I want to make sure that you know the nerve that innervates the quadriceps femoris group as well, femoral L2, 3, and 4. If you don't have that highlighted or underlined, highlight or underline that it's the femoral nerve. And we learned that we use our quadriceps to kick a soccer ball, stabilizing yourself in a stationary squat position. Glad we're not here for me to have to do that one. Raising your knee quickly into a bad guy's cojones. This book cracks me up. And then the distal tendon of the quadriceps and the patellar ligament are one of the same structure. Because the tendon attaches one bone to another, the patella to the tibia, it is actually considered a ligament. So we learned ligaments are part of the skeletal system, tendons are part of the muscular system, but the tendon itself is also considered a ligament. That's a good MBLEX question to make note of right there, even though it's not a big test highlight. We're skipping over to page 311. Hamstrings. All three, just make sure there's no questions. We're doing good. All right, all three, oops, did I mute myself? Am I muted, you guys?
No, but
No, we can hear you. Now you are.
Did I disappear? Can you guys see me?
There you are.
no.
There I am, sorry. Still learning these little Surface Pros they have us working on. All right, so the hamstrings, all three hamstrings have a common origin at the ischial tuberosity. That's that sits bones we talked about. I want you to make sure you have highlighted biceps femoris is the lateral hamstring. Highlight, underline, asterisk, whatever you want. The term hamstring originated in 18th century England because back then butchers would display pig carcasses, in their shops by hanging them from the long tendon at the back of the knee. Gross. We're jumping over to page 312. We had a lot of highlights on there on biceps femoris, semitendinosus, and semimembranosus. We want to know the actions. They all flex the knee, right, at the tibiofemoral joint. They all extend the hip. And also important to know is that they're all innervated, both biceps femoris, tendinosus, and semimembranosus, that they're all innervated by sciatic nerve. When do we use our hamstrings? Running, cycling, swimming, climbing stairs, stabilizing your hip while bending over to tie your shoes, scraping mud off of your boots. Extension of the hip. So I guess scraping back behind you. Gluteals. So page 315. I want you to make sure that you have highlighted the large superficial gluteus maximus is the most posterior muscle of the group. The large superficial gluteus maximus is the most posterior muscle of the group. It's also, and you can write this down if you want to, the most massive muscle in the body. It's not in there to highlight, but you could write that right out next to it or next to the word gluteus maximus. And I want you to know that it extends the hip and laterally rotates the hip. Those two actions are super important. It also adducts the hip and the lower fibers adduct the hip. So all fibers abduct the hip, lower fibers adduct the hip. I want you to know its insertion is the IT tract and the gluteal tuberosity, the lower fibers gluteal tuberosity. Know its insertion. Highlight it, underline it, put a super special asterisk next to it, whatever works best for you. Gluteus, sorry, I need my more of my coffee this morning. All right, gluteus medius, guys. All fibers abduct the hip. Anterior fibers flex the hip and medially rotate. Those posterior fibers extend the hip. Make sure you have that those posterior fibers extend the hip in your highlights. Stop me if you have any questions. When do we use our glutes? Climbing stairs, running, cycling, swimming, skating, Latin dancing, lots of lateral rotation of the hip. If you've ever been Latin dancing, you know you're doing lots of that swaying of the hip, you guys. And thank God the camera's only from here up today. All right, let's go over to the adductor group. Adductor group. The adductor group, 5 adductors are located along the medial line between the hamstrings and the quadriceps femoris muscles. I have a mnemonic for you guys to remember those adductors. I'm going to erase this. Hopefully, if you needed my email, I don't even know if you can see it. I can always type it for you. Hopefully, you'll be able to see this. If not, you can write it down while I'm telling you what it is. Adductors. Adductors. Please, baby, love my groin. Please, baby, love my groin. They are on the medial side of the leg, closest to the groin. PBLMG. Pectineus. I apologize if I spell it wrong. Is that an EUS or an IUS? EUS. EUS. Then we have the 3 adductors that have the name adductor in them. Adductor brevis, adductor longus, and adductor, trying to write where you can see it, but I don't know that you'll be able to see it. Adductor magnus, and then gracilis. And I always spell gracilis wrong, so I'm going to look in my book for gracilis. C-I-L-L-S. C-I-L-L-I-S. All right, adductors. I don't know if you can see that, but you can look at them in your book. Please, baby, love my groin. Pectineus. Then the 3 middle, baby, love mine, are your adductor brevis, longus, and magnus, gracilis, groin. Is that helpful to you guys? Type me a thumbs up if that's helpful to you guys. Let me know that you're still out there listening to me.
Still here listening.
Yes. All right, good. So that's a good mnemonic. Please, baby, love my groin. Thanks, Daniela, David, Coral, knowing you're still with me. These little things will help you when you try to sit down for your Emblex as well, if you have these little mnemonics to help you remember them. All right, so moving on then. I already said the 5 adductors are located along the medial thigh between the hamstrings and quadriceps femoris muscles. The 5th adductor, gracilis, lies superficial on the medial thigh. It is the only adductor that crosses the knee. That's worth noting. Only adductor that crosses the knee. All fibers adduct, adduct the hip and medially rotate. I want you to make sure you have an underline on this next one. All except gracilis assist to flex the hip. Gracilis does not assist to flex the hip. I want you guys to make sure you put a little star next to that one. All of them assist to flex the hip except the gracilis. Gracilis flexes the knee. All right, moving on, we look at adductor magnus. Now we're breaking down those adductors by individual muscles. The adductor muscle originates inferior ramus of the pubis, ramus of ischium, ischial tuberosity, and inserts the medial lip of the linea aspera and adductor tubercle. It is innervated by the obturator L234. I want you to know that adductor longus, adductor magnus, adductor brevis, and pectineus are all innervated by that obturator nerve. Important to make sure you have that highlight underlined there. Okay, make sure you have a little asterisk next to that. The nerve that innervates those 3 adductors, pectineus and gracilis, all 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. My bad. Obturator L2, 3, and 4. Moving on, if you don't have any questions. All right, we're getting to the TFL and IT band, IT track on page 324. The tensor fascia latae, and I say latte the way I do, like I said, because of where it's located. Can't see my love handles, but I drink too many lattes. And it goes right to my hips. The TFL is a small superficial muscle located on the lateral side of the upper thigh, approximately 3 fingers wide, you guys. So it's a little tiny area, and sometimes you'll be able to feel that hip area. If you've slept too long in like a curled up fetal position, that's one of the muscles you'll feel that will feel tight when you try to lengthen it back out in the morning. It's spent the whole night in that shortened, contracted kind of position, right? The IT tract is a superficial sheet of fascia with vertical fibers that run along the lateral thigh. And a lot of time it can be extremely tender when we try to do forearm sweeps up the IT tract there. It's entirely accessible. As a matter of fact, it's because it's so superficial, a lot of times it can be quite painful, but it really feels good to sweep up proximally over the IT band. You just don't want to press in too hard with the bony part of your arm. So actions, it flexes the hip, medially rotates the hip, abducts the hip. Its origin is iliac crest, posterior to the ASIS, and I want to make sure that you have definitely highlighted its insertion is the IT tract. TFL attaches at the IT tract. You can see how it comes down and inserts into it in that diagram on 324. Let's skip over to page 326, the sartorius. I'm gonna get a little drink. All right, you guys. Sartorius, is the longest muscle in the body. Make sure you have a highlight there or an underline. It is the longest muscle in the body, stretching from the anterior superior iliac spine across the thigh to the medial knee. Because it comes across the thigh and it comes around down to the medial knee, it crosses two joints. Important to know if you have to write it down, sartorius crosses two joints. That means it makes actions happen in two places. That's why it can flex the hip and rotate the hip, adduct the hip, but it can also flex the knee and medially rotate the flexed knee because it comes around into that medial side of the tibia. So it crosses down the knee to the tibia across two joints. Its name, Sartor tailor, refers to its ability to bring the thigh and leg into the position a tailor would when sewing. And you can see that crossed leg position is what they're talking about in that little diagram. Never been to a tailor, I guess. Old days, right? When people used to get everything tailored. Its origin, anterior superior iliac spine, ASIS. Insertion, proximal medial shaft of the tibia at the pes anserinus tendon. And we're gonna have a way to help us remember what inserts there later on as well. I have say grace before tea. We'll go over that later. But sartorius is one of the ones that inserts of those three muscles. I'll write it down now. Actually, I'll wait till we get to that highlight to write it down. Another mnemonic to help you remember the muscles that come into that pes, the PA. All right, so let's move on, if there aren't any questions, over to the lateral rotators of the hip, page 320.
Hello, I'm sorry to interrupt. I did have
lateral rotators of the hip. So piriformis, quadratus femoris, obturator internus, obturator externus, gemellus superior, gemellus inferior, sometimes known as the deep six. Make sure that's a highlight. These small muscles are located deep to the gluteus maximus and create lateral rotation of the hip, all attached to aspects of the greater trochanter, and they fan out medially to attach to the sacrum and pelvis. Make sure you have this highlight on page 328. All of the lateral rotators are deep to the large sciatic nerve, except the piriformis, and that's what I mentioned earlier. Piriformis lies above. That's why piriformis is the culprit most of the time for pinching that sciatic nerve and giving that numbness and tingling. And even if you don't have regular sciatic nerve issue, I don't know if you've ever been in like plank position in yoga or doing push-ups and you lower down, sometimes piriformis, because the way it squeezes the glutes together, can actually cause a little ripple down the leg, that little pinch of piriformis. The piriformis lies superficial to the sciatic nerve. If overcontracted, can compress it. So I have a good mnemonic. Dave might have told you this one, so it might be a repeat, but I'm going to do it again for remembering that deep six. If you are able to write it down, it's please quit oogling our grandma's glutes. I don't like glutes. You can choose to use that one. These are the deep six. Deep six. Can you see that on the board? Please. Oogling. Sorry, guys, I don't know what part of this. Do you hear any of, somebody chat yes or no, did you hear any of the mnemonic to remember the deep six? Or did I cut out the entire time? Somebody can type it if you want to.
You are cutting in and out.
No, okay. All right, so we're talking about the deep six, you guys. You cut out. Am I cut out again? Can you hear me now?
Yes, but it's cutting in and out.
Can you guys hear me? Let me know if you can hear me again, okay, guys? This shows that I'm on and I'm live. Yes, you can hear me again. So? Huh. I wonder if we have a bad signal happening. I don't think the volume on the actual. All right. I'm not sure. Let's see. You can hear me better now?
Yes, you
Okay.
seem to be back.
All right. So the deep six. So we got the highlight, the piriformis, all of the deep six lie deep to the sciatic except for the piriformis, right? Okay. So my way of remembering the deep six, I don't know if Dave taught you guys this. Please quit oogling our grandma's glutes. To me, it makes me think the G's are glutes. I learned it and like to say, please quit oogling our grandma's gems, as in her rubies and her diamonds. I like that one better. So please, I'm gonna write these down. Piriformis. Quit. I gotta bring this over here. Quadratus femoris, because I'm gonna spell it all wrong. Oogling is, I know one of them is an obturator. Obturator internus. E-R-U-R. Obturator internus. Please quit oogling our obturator externus. Gemellus. And you have your gemellus inferior and superior. And you might not be able to see that behind me. I know that board's kind of far away. Maybe you wrote it down. Please quit oogling, which is eyeballing, our grandma's gems. Piriformis, quadratus femoris, obturator internus, obturator externus, gemellus superior, gemellus inferior. All right, we're going to move forward if you don't have any questions about the deep six. We're going to jump over to the piriformis on page 330. And it just talks about how you palpate piriformis, right? Prone, locate the coccyx, PSIS, and greater trochanter. Together, these three landmarks form a T. So when you come up and you feel that area, and of course, if you're palpating on somebody, you don't really necessarily want to bring your fingers right into like the coccyx area because that means you're bringing it right into the crack of their bottom. So I kind of just set my hand in that area like this, and then I come out to where trochanter is this way, and I know it lies right in that line, and that's where I kind of come in with that elbow stripping out towards trochanter when I want to release it. and or kind of rocking back and forth like this into the piriformis when I'm trying to release it on somebody. Can even do that with the knuckles and kind of rock this way. You don't necessarily have to go straight in and cause somebody to jump off the table if when you're applying pressure, you're rocking this way towards origin and insertion to help remove it versus just coming straight down into that belly. Going to give them a lot of pain and not really release anything. So it shows you kind of where that T is. I don't know that we have that specific question on the test, but I have seen it come up on Massage Prep and MBLEX. So always good to start laying that groundwork now. Let's jump over to page 332, the iliopsoas. All right, iliacus and psoas major together called the iliopsoas. So make note that it is psoas major and iliacus. Are important hip flexors and lower back stabilizers. Make sure you underline they are important hip flexors and lower back stabilizers. Best known to your local butcher as the tenderloin or filet mignon, the long slender psoas major is located deep to the abdominal contents. It stretches from the lumbar vertebra all the way underneath the inguinal ligament to the lesser trochanter. It's a hard area to work on a lot of people. We don't do a lot of abdominal massage. I do usually give clients who have a lot of tightness in their hip flexors. They have that anterior hip tilt, which means that the psoas is pulling those hips forward like that. They're starting to get too much lordotic curve in their lower lumbar area. One of the things that you can, once you've helped do some stretches, like if they're prone, I always do a hip flexor stretch where I cradle the knee and lift up like that to stretch the hip flexor. But I will also have them come into a yoga lunge. It's called crescent, where their leg is way back behind them. I wish I could show you guys. That's the problem with not being live. But that leg is back in a lunge. It's not a lunge where the knee is bent coming down to the floor. That leg is tight, tight, tight with the heel pushing back. The glutes squeezing. That engages that hip flexor. Then they can bring that arm over edge and they'll feel it rise right up into the belly. And a lot of times hip flexors are tight and shortened like that. You can have them do some homework in between seeing you to help prolong the benefits of your massage. But some Thai massage, some good deep range of motion stretches for the hip, especially a hip flexor stretch when prone is a really good one for iliopsoas. Its action, flexing the hip. When the insertion is fixed or in a held position, it flexes the trunk towards the thigh, meaning it is like my feet are on the ground, it is fixed. It tilts the pelvis anterior. I was talking about that anterior pelvis tilt can be too extreme and start to cause a lordotic curve in the back. Its origin, bodies and transverse processes of the lumbar vertebrae. Its insertion, the lesser trochanter, in there where the sciatic nerve goes. And then the iliacus flexes the hip, flexes the trunk when the insertion is fixed, and tilts the pelvis anteriorly as well. And you can see both of those muscles there in your diagrams. Page 333, when do we use our iliopsoas? Hiking, climbing, or walking on an incline, getting up from a reclined position, like a small sit-up when we crunch forward, kind of. Reaching up against gravity to unite the ropes around your ankles that suspend you upside down from a tree limb. It could happen. Not to this girl. Psoas major primarily flexes the hip, but when the femur is stabilized, the psoas in conjunction with iliacus can increase lordotic curvature in the lumbar spine and create anterior tilt, that downward rotation of the pelvis. It has been theorized that only the superficial fibers of the psoas increase the lordotic curve, whereas the deeper fibers may decrease it. So that's always something good to know. Any questions so far? We're doing good? All right, so coming over to page 336, sorry guys, first day with my new mouth. Page 336, other structures of the pelvis and thigh. The femoral triangle is located on the anterior medial surface of the thigh. It is formed by the inguinal ligament adductor longus and sartorius. Highlight and underline inguinal ligament adductor longus and sartorius are what form that triangle. And you can see in the diagram kind of where that triangle is. This online teaching is a new experience for us all, isn't it? I don't know if there's really anything else in this section. Let me look through. I think we're good there. We did please quit oogling our grandma's glutes. And we did the adductors acronym. So I think we're good for now. Any questions before we move on to reviewing the leg and foot? We're good? If we are good, we're going to jump over to page 352. 352 in our trail guide while I erase the board. Ooh, we need this board cleaned. All right, so now we're getting to one of the other mnemonics. On page 352, you're going to see where the pes anserinus is, the attachment site, right? So pes anserinus means in Latin goose foot, and it kind of looks like a big flat goose foot fanning out. These tendons of the three tendons of the thigh, sartorius, gracilis, and semitendinosus, converge at the medial knee to form the large pes anserinus tendon, which attaches to the proximal medial shaft of the tibia. I want you to know those three muscles, sartorius, gracilis, and semitendinosus. We have a little acronym for that one. Say, this is for pes anserinus. Hopefully I spelled that correctly. I did. Please say grace before T. So say grace before T. The please is for the pes anserinus. So that's what this is. You can just say grace before T if you want to. Sartorius, say. Gracilis, grace. And T, before you drink your tea, semitendinosus. So sartorius. Tendinosus. T-E-N, T-I-N, T-E-N, right? T-E-N-D-I-N. T-E-N-D-I-N, tendinosus. So that, before you drink your tea, is the T in semitendinosus, because remember we have a semimembranosus as well. And the please is standing for the pes anserinus. So say grace before T. That's a good way to remember those three muscles. I want to make sure you have them highlighted and underlined. Sartorius, gracilis, semitendinosus. Attach in, or the pes is PA, as I like to call it, is the attachment site for those three muscles. Good? All right, so moving over into the bones and bony landmarks of the foot and ankle. I don't really have any highlights that we didn't already do, but let's see. I want to get over to where the diagram of all the bones are. Well, heck, it's not in here where I wanted it to be. So if you look at your diagram that's on the test, this guy. Oh, we don't have you guys labeling all of them on this test, do we? We got rid of all of them being labeled. You guys got lucky. When we created the new test, we didn't list all of the little cuneiforms, middle, medial, lateral cuneiforms, but it may come up later on, so we're going to do this mnemonic anyways. There's a couple of them that we can do. Dave probably taught you guys never totally consume curdled milk. So I'll write both of them up there. MILC. Never totally consume curdled milk. I don't know if you guys can see that. We've got your navicular, your cuboid, your calcaneus, your talus, your medial cuneiform, middle, lateral cuneiform. Middle used to be called intermediate. Oops. Well, I just got black dry erase on my pretty bright red tennis shoes. All right, so this I used to be an intermediate. Now it's called middle, so your acronym could be MMLC for milk. I still do MILC because it makes me remember it's the one in the middle of the medial and lateral of your cuneiforms. And then you have your talus, your navicular, your calcaneus, your cuneiforms, your cuboid, navicular, right? Navicular, talus, calcaneus, cuboid, middle. I think I got all of them. I learned it by learning the acronym cute tiger cubs need milk. Cute tiger cubs need milk is the acronym that I learned. Same number of letters when you do cute tiger cubs need milk. How you want to learn those is up to you. Cute tiger cubs need milk. You have navicular, talus, calcaneus, cuboid, middle, medial, and lateral cuneiforms. All right, we're going to move on, you guys. Ask me if you have any questions about how to remember the bones of the foot. If not, you can pick whichever of those two acronyms work best for you. And I am skipping forward to page 369. My favorite section again, where it shows all the muscles responsible for different actions and movements. The ankle, we are looking at the ankle on page 369. Plantar flexion, standing on those tiptoes, engaging soleus and gastrocnemius, right? So I think I told you guys this last time. You want to know those primary 3 primaries and the 2 assists. So gastroc, soleus, and tibialis posterior are those primary movers, and peroneus longus and peroneus brevis are those robins to the Batman. They are assisters. Dorsiflexion, this one I want to make sure you know, make sure it's highlighted, underlined. Tibialis anterior, extensor digitorum longus, and the hallucis longus. All 3 are for dorsiflexion. That's flexing those toes up this way into that bent position like we stand all day long. Another good reason why tibialis anterior needs a good massage. So make sure you have those guys underlined and highlighted. Tibialis anterior, extensor digitorum, and hallucis. Flipping the page to page 370. Had to get a drink. I want to make sure you have underlined eversion. Eversion of the foot. You can see the direction that the arrows go when you're doing eversion versus inversion. Eversion is out the other way. And peroneus longus, peroneus brevis, and extensor digitorum longus are the extensors, and eversion. They are the ones that do eversion. I want you to write a little muscle in there. Remember we learned that peroneus longus and brevis sometimes have a tertius, T-E-R-T-I-U-S. So eversion is peroneus longus, peroneus brevis, and extensor digitorum longus. And I want you to write down, and sometimes tertius when present. If there's a tertius, it's doing the eversion as well. That way, if you ever see tertius on a test, you won't think the answer is incorrect, because if it exists, it is doing the eversion. So write down peroneus tertius, T-E-R-T-I-U-S. Then we're going to jump on over to page 371. And we're looking at the gastrocnemius and the soleus now. Oh, I see a question. What was that muscle? The one we just talked about for eversion? Yes, okay. Eversion, peroneus longus, peroneus brevis. And I want you to write down tertius, T-E-R-T-I-U-S, when present. We learned on Tuesday that sometimes there is also a peroneus tertius, that there is a third one. When it exists, it is also responsible for eversion. And the reason I want you to write it there is I have seen before it has asked about tertius, and we don't learn a lot about it. So it's good to know that that is also eversion when it's present. Good stuff, as Dave would say. Any questions? It's so hard. You're welcome, David. It's so hard when I don't get to see faces to see if anybody's shaking yes or no. It's all blank screen, so you just kind of assume everybody's there with you, not sleeping. All right, so we're going over to the gastroc and soleus. We know those are those big calf muscles, right? Can really see those pop out on cyclists and people like that. Help us stand up on our toes and volunteer when I ask you guys to help me do something in class. So they all come together into that calcaneal tendon that we learned is also called the Achilles tendon, right? The superficial gastrocnemius has 2 heads and crosses 2 joints, the knee and the ankle. So we know it's responsible for movement of both joints if it crosses both joints, just like sartorius. So it can flex the knee and plantar flex the ankle. And I want to make sure you guys have that highlighted and underlined. Action, flex the knee and plantar flex the ankle. Its origin is the condyles of the femur, posterior surface. Make sure you know that insertion is that calcaneus via the calcaneal tendon or the Achilles tendon. And also know that tibial nerve S1 and 2 innervate both gastroc and soleus. tibial nerve, both gastroc and soleus. The soleus is deep to the gastroc, yet its medial and lateral fibers bulge from the sides of the leg and extend further distal to the gastrocnemius heads. The soleus is sometimes called the second heart because of the important role it plays in strong contractions of returning the blood to the heart. Remember, we talked about this. Our blood returning to the heart isn't as strong as leaving the heart. We have that ba-boom, ba-boom heart pushing it out, right? But when it has to return back up, it really relies on our muscular contractions. That's why lifting weights, walking, doing yoga, whatever you're doing to keep movement in the muscles, contraction of the muscles of the leg, super important. That's why getting out and doing 30 minutes of walking, 15 minutes of walking, whatever you can a day, is going to help your heart, even though it seems like not that big a deal. We now know that muscle, when we're flexing those feet in that walking position, that movement of the ankle and the knee is causing that soleus to contract and relax, helping return that blood flow all the way back up to our heart. So we needed to know gastroc flexes the knee, plantar flexes the ankle. We want to know that soleus plantar flexes the ankle as well. Its insertion is important, also into that calcaneal or Achilles tendon. And the same thing, the nerve that innervates both soleus and gastroc, tibial nerve. And I think that's it for those two that I have for you. Why was a calcaneal tendon? We talked about this the other day. Originally called the Achilles tendon. As a baby, the Greek mythological warrior Achilles was dipped into the river Styx by his mother. She held him by the ankle, so his ankle was his weak spot. It was his Achilles tendon, and he got shot with an arrow through the heel and died from it. So that's why we call it our Achilles heel if we have a weakness, because of that little bit of Greek mythology there, which is kind of cool. And I did not learn that in school. I did not learn that until I came back to teaching. So interesting. When do we use our gastroc and soleus? Peeking over a fence, being a creeper, walking, running, climbing, carrying a heavy backpack up a steep hill, pedaling your bike up a grueling hairpin turn in France. Let's go over to page 374, the plantaris. The plantaris has a short muscle belly, but the longest tendon in the body. I want you to underline longest tendon in the body. And I want you to know that it inserts at that Achilles tendon also, calcaneus via the calcaneal tendon. And even though it's deep to gastroc and soleus, up near the popliteal area, you can access the plantaris. You just have to be careful when you're going in there that you're not pressing on any of the popliteal nodes, or like you need to be able to feel where that muscle belly is. We've got some fairly superficial nerves in that area as well. That's why that's an endangerment zone in the popliteal region. And then moving on to the popliteus on page 375. We highlighted, as its name suggests, the popliteus is located in the popliteal space. If you have a hard time remembering the popliteal, if you remember when I taught you body regions, my goofy little things like a patella on the front, patella, ella, a, right? Popliteal in the back. I always remember that in the movies, when the girl gets the good kiss, her foot lifts in the air. She pops her heel up. She has to use her popliteal to pop her heel up for that good kiss. So it's in the popliteal region. Although the popliteus is a weak flexor of the knee, it is vital in unlocking the joint from an extended position, hence its nickname, the key which unlocks the knee. Please make sure that you know popliteus is the key that unlocks the knee. Okay, good. I don't think there's any more for right there. All right, 376, peroneus longus and brevis. Again, recapping what we learned. I don't have any super special highlights there, but we did have highlights on this page, known also as the fibularis longus and brevis. Peroneus fibularis, kind of one and the same. The slender peroneal muscles are located on the lateral side of the fibula. So lateral side of the fibula, we know tibia, big toe, fibula, little toe. So it's that far lateral side of our lower leg as well. Peroneus longus and brevis both evert the foot and assist in plantar flexion. And we learned about the tertius earlier, right? And if you look on page 377, I think we probably highlighted this box that it says it's not uncommon for there to be a third peroneal if present, the tertius. So that's where we had earlier the muscles that do eversion, that I had you guys write tertius down, just in case that one pops up on you. Over on page 378, extensors of the ankles and toes. The tibialis anterior is large, superficial, and the most clearly isolated of the group. It lies directly lateral to the tibial shaft. It's about 2 to 3 fingers wide at the top. I will both strip up and down. Like I know we usually work, sorry, there was a hair. We usually work centripetally towards the heart, but sometimes if the tibia is pulling and causing pain in the lower leg, I will strip down towards where the pain in the pull is. Most of the time though, I come in and I do cross fiber. I find the tibia, I curl my thumbs right in under the edge of the tibia, and I cross fiber down across tibialis anterior that way to release it. It inverts the foot and dorsiflexes the ankle. The extensor digitorum longus dorsiflexes the ankle, and hallucis longus dorsiflexes the ankle as well. We know it'll also help us extend the toes, right? Because our toes and our knees are on backwards. So if you weren't in the lecture on Tuesday, remember we talk about this over and over again. Muscles on the front of the body flex, muscles on the back of the body extend, except for our knees and our toes are on backwards. So the muscles on the front of the toes extend the toes, the muscles on the plantar side of our foot flex the toes. So they're flip-flopped, our extensors and our flexors for the toes. Tibialis posterior, page 382. I'll take a quick drink again. All right. Tibialis posterior inverts the foot and plantar flexes the ankle. And then page 385, muscles of the foot. Because they bear the weight of the body, and we talked about this again on Tuesday, how important it is. Our weight is evenly distributed, hip width apart. Slight turnout of about 10 degrees of hip lateral rotation or foot is normal. Anything turned further out or in tends to be too much medial or lateral rotation. So we want those feet. We talked about those arches and what we call in yoga, when I teach yoga, we call it the triangle of stability. You want to roll around on your feet, make sure that you're firmly planted on those feet, because if we start to have issues with the way we walk with our feet, it just starts that domino effect of our body. And when you do postural assessment and stuff like that, you learn as well. We look at the knees in ratio to the ankles, the hips in ratio to the knees. So our posture, our lower back problems, unless it's an injury from strain, start from the feet and it works their way up. And of course, most of us do stand around. I tend to stand because I tore that MCL on my right leg. I tend to stand with all my weight on my left foot with my hand on my hip. It's causing that compression and shortening of my QL muscle. It's causing stretched weakness on my right side. And so all those imbalances start from how I tend to stand and put the weight on my feet. So thinking about that triangle of stability is important. Something that I explain to clients that you'll get used to You don't have to go into a lot of technical terms for your client. You can really simplify it, but your clients are really going to love and appreciate you if you give them homework when they come to see you. If you explain to them, if they have that anterior shoulder tilt and they're feeling all that pain in the neck and shoulders, and we're working to open up the pecs, even though they think it's coming from back here, we know it's coming from here. Send your client home with homework to open up and stretch pectoralis major, minor, all of this area, anterior deltoids. Same with tight hip flexors. Send them home with those high lunges to stretch psoas major with that arm overhead and open it up. Things like that to work on for posture where they're standing with their heels, their butt, their shoulders, and their head against the wall in anatomic position. You'll find a lot of your clients who have all of this tilt in the hips and everything going on are maybe good for 30 seconds with proper anatomic posture like it should be. Other than that, that's all the highlights. Do we have any questions about how the test works or any of the activities that we have online? Maybe tell me yes or no in the chat if we're good there. If we have any questions. I don't see any need to keep going on and on if we've got it wrapped up. We're good? So we know what we need to do with our test. I know it's pretty easy. Do you have to do SPA as well? So Coral, your group, what were the 3 A's? The group that was in with you, Sandro, Nando, Sandra, Crystal, they are completely done, but they needed SPA, so we opened up SPA for them. If you're able to see SPA, but you still have a lot to do in your level 3, then you won't do SPA until we circle back around for the 3 A's to get to it. So I think your group, Coral, will be circling back around to those things that you didn't get when you jumped in with the advanced 3s that we were doing in order to wrap up their program. SPA was all they needed, and they're finished, except for some evals and services, which we're working on figuring out how in the heck we're going to get those done while we still have all the social distancing, trying to see if we can't get some massage dummies in here that can be massaged on and stuff. But there's like everybody in the world that teaches massage therapy is trying to get those things. So we don't know how that's going to work out. But I hope that answers your question. It sounds good, Coral. All right. Does anybody have any questions about this specific section that you're working on now that's due by Sunday? We divided it over 3 days so that all those activities need to be turned in. That's how we document what you're getting for your 8 hours each day. So that means not only the packet in completion when you send it to us, but the diagrams as well that were posted separately, because that's just that way to help you study and review. And we know it's tempting when you take the exam to sit there with your diagrams in front of you, but remember you can't do any of that when you take the MBLEX, right? So if you're finding it easier to do some of these exams open book, there's not really anything we can do about it, but just remember that that's just going to require extra studying when you get ready to sit for your MBLEX. So, you know, especially since you're allowed to retake tests with us, really challenge yourself while you're doing your distance learning to still memorize the material and not rely on the books and things that you have, the materials that are uploaded. I think there's a bodybuilder activity in there as well, like we've done with the others, that you have to download those pictures and identify at least 3 muscles on each of them that are having to do with hip, leg, thigh, cahoots. I think that's all the activities that there are in there, maybe some slides to look at. So if you don't have any other questions, then that means we're done. Give me a thumbs up and tell me we're good before I log off, or unmute and let me know that you're good. One of the two. Thank you, Coral. No more questions? I don't see anybody coming in on the chat, so I think we're good, right?
Thank you. Have a good day.
Steady.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right, guys, I'm gonna log off then if I don't have anything else that anybody's asking. Daniela, thank you. You guys have a great day. Hopefully we'll get to see you back in house soon, or if in your Fort Myers, hopefully I'll be coming down there to visit you guys soon too. I'd like to see the Fort Myers campus and check it out. I've heard it's a big campus compared to our Clearwater one. All right, guys, thank you. Have a great day. Don't know if I'll be working with you next week. I think I'm going to be teaching arm and shoulder to the level Bs, so we'll see. Have a great day, everybody. I'm going to log off now. Is it not ending? End.